r/MaliciousCompliance, Marine versus Power-Tripping Bouncer. Story 1. I served in the Navy when I was a young, superb raccoon. At the ripe age of 21, my buddies and I decided to hit up a bar with a local cover band. So we arrived at the establishment and I confidently handed over my ID. Now, granted, I didn't look exactly 21 with my clean-cut appearance, but my out-of-state ID should have sufficed. Little did I know the doorman had other plans. He decided to mess with me, declaring, "This is fake, I'm keeping it." My eyes practically popped out of my head as I replied, "Dude, that's a military ID, give it back." "Nope, it's mine now, $20 or get lost," he retorted. I tried to reason, I can't get back on base without it. To which he replied with his ultimatum, "Then you better cough up $20 or get lost." I saw through the shakedown. Get lost, you say? All right then, cue my act of malicious compliance. My friend, who had a state ID and drove us there, took us back to report my lost stolen ID at the officer of the day's office. The OOD was a seasoned old-timer, a Mustang, someone who took orders from the president and maybe even God, depending on his mood. As we explained the situation, the OOD's eyes narrowed with a sinister glint. "Chief, can you come up here? I've got a little present for you." Now I started to sweat a bit, wondering if I was headed for a stint in the brig for losing my ID. Well, there wasn't any hope of a promotion to E4. Seaman Raccoon here says the doorman at Joe's took his ID and wants $20. Grab a driver and one of those Marines at the gate and head down there to sort this out. The chief regarded me like fresh meat. "Come on, you two, we're going for a ride." So the three of us piled into the van, accompanied by a couple of Marines in BDU with sidearms. It was a tense and quiet ride, and the chief didn't look too thrilled about the situation. "I can't believe I have to deal with this nonsense. Well, at least I won't be stuck at the desk all night." As we pulled up to the bar, it was bustling with people. The doorman didn't seem as imposing as Chief strode up to him, flanked by 2 armed Marines. I kept my distance. "Raccoon, is this the guy with your ID?" "Yes, Chief," I affirmed. The chief got right up in the doorman's face. He may have been short and stout, but he was built like a tank. The muscular doorman took a step back, but he had nowhere to escape from the narrow entrance. "Give me his ID now, or I'll start looking for it myself," Chief demanded. The ID was promptly produced and handed to me while the doorman was utterly ignored. Chief swung the door open, surveyed the room, and signaled the Marines to clear a path through the bar, make it wide. They did so, calmly instructing patrons to move aside as the music and chatter subsided. Chief grabbed a chair, stood on it, and projected his voice as if on a parade ground. "All active duty military, this establishment is now on the prohibited list. Settle your tabs and leave." He stepped down and walked out with the Marines trailing behind him, and half the bar followed suit. Although this far from the base, not many were on active duty, but a good number were reserve or retired, and they didn't take too kindly to this kind of behavior either. That place found its way on the prohibited list and was still there when I transferred out some 6 months later. Yep, I sure did get lost, and I did it with gusto. Man, that doorman really had karma knocking on his door that day. It's mind-boggling how some folks can't resist the temptation to mess with others, whether it's bullying or trying to squeeze cash out of them. Well, in this case, it was the Marines who showed that bullies should think twice. Imagine the look on the doorman's face when he realized a young serviceman would comply with his $20 demand with the troops in tow, not for fun, but for payback time. He thought he was the big shark in the pool, only to be caught off guard by a megalodon, that bored yet concerned chief who swooped in to save the day. I bet that bully turned redder than a beet when he saw those jarheads coming. The chief definitely taught that doorman a lesson about picking on someone his own size. It's a classic example of why you shouldn't mess with people who just want to have a good time. Seriously, what was going through that doorman's head when he decided to do that to a paying customer? And messing with a military man's ID would be a recipe for trouble, right? If I were the owner, I wouldn't want an employee jeopardizing my business like that. The story also highlights the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of who they are. It's all about honor and ethics, just like in the military. Whether you're dealing with a celebrity or your next-door neighbor, treating people with fairness and dignity should be the norm. Do otherwise, and karma might just catch up to you, just like it did to the doorman. Let's also give credit to the chief's problem-solving skills. As a disciplined military officer, he put an end to the conflict without unnecessary drama. It's like watching a chess master checkmate their opponent with just a few strategic moves. The chief's indirect approach, flanking the doorman, was genius. It's a lesson in tactical thinking and how sometimes subtlety can be mightier than brute force. And oh boy, the consequences of the doorman's actions were severe. Not only did he put his job on the line, but he also managed to get the entire establishment slapped on the Navy's prohibited list. That's like getting a big red X on your business. which translates to fewer customers and a boss who's probably not too thrilled. So let's all keep this in mind. Don't be a bully. Think before you act and prioritize respect and fairness. They're the ultimate tools for success.
Oh my God! What is that?
If you two are asking what that is, it's the sponsor of today's video, Rufus Rugs. We've been hard at work, creating the best quality and premium hand-tufted rugs money can buy. Now there's a chance you own a carpet that looks something like this. Let's just be real, it's time for an upgrade. And luckily for you, me and the boys from Rufus Rugs are at your service. We don't make those average cheap quality looking rugs. Nope, not gonna happen. Each one is handcrafted to perfection. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life.
Story 2. I used to work at a bar where my role was unique. I was the only female security personnel. You see, the bar had a history of some troubling incidents, particularly one where a man followed a woman into the bathroom. This unnerving event led them to realize the necessity of having a female security guard who could keep a vigilant eye on what happened there. This particular bar seemed to have a knack for getting into legal trouble. Apart from the bathroom incident I mentioned earlier, they had issues with the fire marshal closing them down on busy weekend nights due to overcrowding. And let's not forget the liquor board, which had already revoked their license once for over-serving and serving minors with glaringly fake IDs. I joined the security team as part of an effort to address these ongoing problems. The situation was dire enough that we had to undergo training by a government ATF representative. We even received official certification cards to prove that we were capable of identifying and preventing over-serving and spotting fake IDs. Looking back, I suspect that one of the real reasons they hired us was to have scapegoats ready for the next time they ran into legal trouble. Despite the challenges, I dedicated myself to the job. However, the owner's wife was a sort of constant frustration. She perpetually seemed to be inebriated, often brought her friends to the bar, and had a tendency to bend the rules in their favor. She carried herself with an air of self-importance, as if we should all be treating her like royalty, just because she happened to be married to the owner. For the most part, I tried to avoid crossing paths with her, but I couldn't help but notice the numerous complaints from my coworkers about her behavior. One night, an incident unfolded that would ultimately lead to my departure from the bar. A patron became sick on his way to the bathroom, and I promptly cut him off from further alcohol service. Eventually, his less inebriated friends escorted him out of the establishment. It was during this incident that I noticed a man sitting at the bar, dressed in creased slacks and a jacket on a summer night, a stark contrast to the typical attire in a busy dance club. What struck me was the absence of a drink in his hand. My instincts kicked in and I paid closer attention, eventually spotting a badge discreetly displayed under his jacket. It became evident that he was there to monitor the bar's compliance with alcohol service regulations. Later on, a highly intoxicated woman stumbled her way to the bathroom, desperately grasping the walls for support. I decided to cut her off from further drinks. In response, she erupted into a fit of screams before retreating to the bathroom. Instead, she attempted to wash off the giant black Sharpie X's that adorned the back of both her hands. I issued a warning, explaining that her continued behavior would result in her ejection from the club. Nevertheless, she emerged from the bathroom still inebriated and belligerent. Approximately 5 minutes later, the owner's wife confronted me, fuming with anger. It turned out that the woman I had refused service to was one of her friends, attending a bachelorette party in the VIP section. Somehow, it was expected that I would have miraculously known about this VIP status. Moreover, I was supposed to disregard the law to accommodate her because of her VIP status. What followed was a heated, escalating argument between the owner's wife and I. I made it abundantly clear that her husband had hired me to ensure compliance with the law. I even began to inform her about the police officer who was present at the bar. However, she responded by screaming at me to shut my mouth and get out of my bar. In that instant, she terminated my employment. Without waiting to see if her husband would intervene, I complied with her demand and left. As I exited the bar, I walked past a police officer who had witnessed the entire confrontation. He was still seated at the end of the bar near where the argument had unfolded. We made eye contact and I gave a subtle nod. In response, he glanced at the owner's wife, rolled his eyes, and offered me a sympathetic smile. That night, the bar faced the consequences of its actions once again, this time resulting in its closure for over-serving the bachelorette party. It turned out to be the final straw, and the establishment eventually went out of business due to the accumulation of legal issues and infractions. Oh man, that bar was just asking for trouble that night, wasn't it? Seriously, they had it coming. It's a real pain in the bum when you're busting your chops trying to enforce the rules and maintain some law and order, and then your boss's wife decides she's above the law and goes on a rule-breaking spree, especially when it comes to over-serving alcohol. That's just unprofessional and plain reckless, not to mention unfair to the entire staff who's been working hard to keep things in check. You'd think the boss's wife would be grateful to have committed employees on the payroll, but no. It seemed like the female security guard was on the ball, putting in all the effort to follow her training and fulfill her responsibilities. She was genuinely trying to prevent any more issues or legal violations from going down in that place, even though she was just an employee. Too bad for her, she ended up working in a bar run by a bunch of incompetents. Despite dealing with her fair share of stubborn customers, she stayed composed and stuck to her duties. She wasn't out to cause trouble, she was just doing her job professionally. But the boss's wife, oh boy, she really had no idea what the words in their business permit meant. There are laws in place for public safety, and it's the owner's responsibility to uphold them. Instead, they were trying to use the security staff as scapegoats. The argument that night escalated into a full-blown screaming match, but let's be real, it was the boss's wife who lit the fuse. The security guard was just trying to do her job properly. She even attempted to explain to the wife that there was an undercover cop in the bar, but it fell on deaf ears. The wife's aggressive behavior was totally uncalled for. She seemed to think she was exempt from the law like some master of fate. Well, that mindset drove their business straight into the ground. Talk about putting on an absurd show right in front of the ATF. How much worse could it get? This story is a stark reminder that laws are there to protect people from harm and self-sabotage, and we should all abide by them. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you get a free pass to break the rules. You never know if that person sitting next to you at the bar could be an undercover cop keeping an eye on things. Well, not that we should all be paranoid, thinking Big Brother is always watching, but we should genuinely follow the law because we care about our customers' well-being and want our businesses to thrive. We've got to give major props to that security woman for making a brave decision and walking the plank, so to speak. It was a smart move to do it before things got even messier. I'm sure that decision will live rent-free in her mind for a long time, and rightly so. Story 3. Our downstairs neighbor had an unusual demand. She wanted us to walk normally, so we complied, and boy did she hate it. We've been residing in this apartment for 3 years now. It's a cozy space, but it's showing its age. The building itself is around 20 years old, and while they've updated the appliances, wall paint, and carpets, one thing they haven't touched is the floor. It's excruciatingly thin, and every step we take results in a symphony of creaks and groans that can be incredibly annoying. Given that we live on the 3rd floor and we can only imagine how much worse it must be for our downstairs neighbors, so we've genuinely made an effort to be considerate and keep the noise down. A few months ago, a new neighbor moved into the apartment below ours. She was absolutely convinced that we were stomping around like a herd of elephants. Every time I closed my door, she'd respond by banging something on her ceiling. The same went for when I crossed the living room, vacuumed, or even when my dog innocently chewed on a bone. It had reached a point where we felt like we were walking on eggshells in our own home, all because of her persistent banging every time we took a step. Finally, it seemed she had reached her breaking point. She stormed upstairs to confront us one day, yelling, "You're too loud. You need to be courteous and walk normally. We have neighbors." She looked like she was on the verge of tears, which was quite unsettling. We felt genuinely bad about it. My husband tried to explain to her that we were doing our best to be quiet, but the floors were old and creaky. We weren't stomping or jumping around, we were just living our lives as usual, but we promised to be more considerate. However, she wasn't satisfied with our response and continued to argue, saying, "I'd lived on the 1st floor before and my other neighbors weren't as loud as you." She complained about the stress from her job and insisted that we needed to stop stomping. "I don't want to be mean," she said, "but I really think you're too loud." In an attempt to resolve the issue, we agreed to walk like normal people, even though that's precisely what we'd been doing all along. So we continued to walk normally, and she continued to bang on the floor and give us nasty looks. We were just regular people living our lives, our dog being a typical dog who enjoyed chewing bones and getting excited for walks. We were so utterly normal. We'll be moving to a new place in the next month, so her complaints won't bother us much for longer. Here's hoping the next tenant doesn't have kids, or maybe they do, and then our current neighbor will finally realize that we were always just normal people who walk normally. Maybe she'll even miss us. By the way, I've noticed some of you taking issue with my use of the word old to describe the building, given that it's only around 20 years old. I apologize for any confusion. In the context of my big city, most apartment buildings are relatively new, having been around for only a decade or so. So compared to those, this one felt old to me. I also want to express my gratitude for all the stories, advice, and insights shared by you. They were quite enlightening. However, despite your suggestions, it's hard to be concerned about wearing slippers all day or padding the carpeted floors with noise-canceling material when our neighbor continues to express her displeasure with noisy gestures. Some people just seem to enjoy being angry. I'm looking forward to moving day when there will be plenty of noise from people walking around and moving furniture. You know, it's like this couple is living in a sitcom about an apartment drama. They're probably thinking, if these walls could talk, they'd say, "Chill out, neighbor." I can imagine that the couple in this story is on the brink of starting a petition to make the walls soundproof or conjure a spell to silence their neighbor's complaints. Sharing tight spaces with folks in an old building can be a real adventure and not always the fun kind. The couple is just trying to go about their day, but their downstairs neighbor seems to have supersonic hearing. She hears a dog happily munching on some bone and won't hesitate to remind you. Can you just imagine the sacrifices they had to make just to comply? Like speaking in whispers or walking as if on a commando mission? It's frustrating, to say the least. Almost like living in the movie A Quiet Place. Now, let's try to get into the neighbor's head for a second. Maybe they're working from home or doing a 9-to-5 job, stressed out with all the deadlines and meetings. Every little sound from upstairs feels like a jackhammer to their sanity. It's like trying to focus on a tightrope walk while someone's playing the drums in the background. We can give them the benefit of the doubt, right? But you know what? Being rude and always complaining about your neighbors is a no-go. Instead of playing, banging on the ceiling, and going about yelling their complaints, they should just sit down and chat over some coffee. Finding a compromise that works for everyone is a stepping stone to peaceful coexistence. Maybe it really is time for the couple to move to a different place, somewhere where they can be themselves without tiptoeing around. After all, a happy home is where you can dance like nobody's watching, or in this case, where you can walk without fearing a noise complaint. Here's to hoping they find an apartment where the walls and floors are a bit thicker and the neighbors a tad more chill. Story 4. Teacher hates senior skip day and tries to ruin the fun, so a group of troublemakers obeys her instructions. So here's how it goes. My dad and I were recently chatting about our high school days, and he spilled the tea about a legendary showdown with the grumpy old math teacher, Mrs. Schaefer. According to my old man, Mrs. Schaefer was hands down the best teacher he ever had. But here's the twist. He and his buddies were the ultimate class clowns who couldn't resist pulling pranks and causing a ruckus. From using the classroom phone to orchestrate a hilarious prank on one of their pals to generally making every day in her class feel like a comedy show, they sure knew how to keep things interesting. But in Mrs. Schaefer's eyes, humor was about as foreign as advanced calculus. She was all business, super strict, and had a knack for missing the punchline in their antics. She was a type who believed that everything had to be done by the book and that there was no room for levity. Of course, teenagers, being teenagers, saw her as someone desperately in need of a laugh, and they quickly learned themselves a reputation as the resident troublemakers. Every year, their high school had this sacred tradition called Senior Skip Day, a day every senior eagerly anticipated as a mini vacation from the daily grind. It was like a rite of passage, a chance to savor freedom before stepping into the world of adulthood. But Mrs. Schaefer, in her infinite grouchiness, absolutely despised Senior Skip Day, and during my dad's senior year, she decided to rain on everyone's parade. She announced there'd be a test on that day, and not just any test. Skipping it to enjoy Senior Skip Day would result in a big, fat 0 on your record. It was a surefire way to tank your grade average. You can guess what happened next. My dad, who had a scholarship lined up for his dream school, was fuming. Skipping the tests meant risking his scholarship, but he'd be counting down the days to senior skip day for 4 long years. So he and his buddies hatched a plan that would give Mrs. Schaefer a taste of her own medicine. Senior skip day finally arrived. In the morning, my dad and his pals hit the golf course because their test was scheduled for that afternoon. After wrapping up their game, they dashed back to school, not even bothering to change out of their golfing attire. Now, here's the fun part they hadn't fully considered. Those golf shoes, the ones with the little cleats or spikes on the soles for better grip on the course, well, let's just say they're not exactly made for indoor tile floors. One of them had the smarts to take off his cleats before heading inside, but the rest of the gang, stubborn as ever, insisted on trudging through the school's hollowed halls still wearing their golf shoes. It was a sight to behold. They were slipping and sliding, clinging to walls and laughing their heads off. Just imagine classrooms filled with curious kids poking their heads out, utterly baffled by 4 guys in golf cleats trying to walk around the school like it was a skating rink. Miraculously, they survived the hallway gauntlet and somehow made it upstairs without getting hurt. But now they had a new problem. The hallways had tiles, sure, but the classroom themselves had wood floors, a fact that became painfully apparent as their cleats got stuck with every step. They were clomping around, making an absolute racket, just trying to get to their desks. Everyone in the classroom burst into laughter at the absurd sight, except for one person, Mrs. Schaefer. She was red, looking like she was on the brink of a heart attack, witnessing what my dad fondly refers to as 4 idiots clattering into her room, dressed like they were about to play a round of golf and laughing like they'd heard the whole world's funniest joke. Mrs. Schaefer, her voice quivering with frustration, demanded, "What are you doing?" as she pointed at the once pristine wooden floor now sporting an array of unintended ventilation holes. My dad, who had finally composed himself enough, shrugged and said, "We had some time between golf rounds to take the test, so here we are." The realization dawned on Mrs. Schaefer that indeed they had shown up to take the test just as she had instructed. Her clever plan to outwit them had spectacularly backfired, so she begrudgingly instructed them to take their seats, glaring the whole time. When they finished, they clomped their way out of the classroom, slipping and sliding as they went to catch their next tea time. Well, at least Mrs. Schaefer was fair about it. Dad aced a test and held on to his scholarship, and as the legend goes, those holes in the wooden floors remain to this day. The spirit of youthful defiance strikes again. What those 4 daring souls did was truly one for the history books. It's like witnessing a live-action comedy sketch right in the halls of high school. In certain high schools that hold their own traditions dear, there exists a hallowed ritual known as Senior Skip Day. It's that one glorious day when seniors bid farewell to textbooks and warmly embrace freedom's loving embrace. It's a day to let loose and, most importantly, to be anywhere but school. It's like a teenager's fantasy come true, a brief moment of rebellion blessed by the academic gods before adulthood beckons. So just examine the disdain etched on those seniors' faces when their beloved Mrs. Schaefer decided to wage war against this time-honored tradition. It's as if she despised it with a fiery passion. When Mrs. Schaefer decided to play her trump card and announce a test on Senior Skip Day, our 4 fearless amigos put on their thinking caps. Skipping the test meant endangering their scholarships, but the allure of a day of unbridled freedom was too enticing to ignore. It's akin to being handed a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory and reluctantly trading it for a plate of steamed broccoli. They essentially said, "All right, Mrs. Schaefer, challenge accepted. Who says you can't have fun while still doing your academic responsibilities?" The thought of these high schoolers in their formal golf attire diligently taking a test with spiked shoes on is truly hilarious. Those who can strike a balance between savoring life's moments to the fullest while maintaining their dedication to studies are truly remarkable. Hats off to the teacher, too, for not dampening the spirits of these scholars, even if she might have been boiling with frustration on the inside. Well, she must have been pleasantly surprised to discover that her brilliant pupils managed to ace the test despite their skip day shenanigans. Anyway, let's take a moment to sympathize with the utility crew who dealt with the damages left on the floors. They're the true victims here. Kidding aside, their story is a slice of high school life that's both hilarious and heartwarming. It reminds us that amidst the ordinary, it's these thrilling acts that make our school life memorable. Hey guys, if you like these stories, I'm sure you're gonna love Want Your Kids to Watch Inappropriate Cartoons. Are you sure? Story 3 was pretty great. I'll see you in that one.